I've been an investor, almost 50. I've been a major beneficiary of silver, of the volatility and the cyclicality of silver, and the fact that most people who speculate in silver misunderstand the nature of that market. And understanding a little bit when most people don't understand very much at all is a huge competitive advantage. Silver is described as the poor man's gold, which is to say, because of its lower unit cost, it's accessible to more people. It's sort of democratized gold. And what that means is that after the primary trend has been established higher in a precious metals bull market, established, by the way, the momentum by gold, the second half of a precious metals bull market is usually dominated by silver. It has more volatility to the upside. I believe that negative real interest rates will cause us to have a rip-roaring gold market. I believe that the momentum will be established by the gold market, and I believe that the logical conclusion about that, based on history, is that towards the middle and end of that bull market, that silver will outperform gold. Investors, all investors around the world, are underweight precious metals, precisely at the time that they ought to be overweight precious metals. So let's talk about the why before we talk about the when. The first is geopolitics, which is on everybody's mind. In particular, the weaponization of the US dollar. The US dollar trying to export its policy preferences to other places in the world by utilizing its reserve currency status and SWIFT to punish other people for taking what we believe are un-American views. Many people in the world resent the extraterritorial imposition of US values on their cultures. Other cultures, Iran, Russia, China, India, Brazil, Mexico, Saudi Arabia for that matter, feel overtly threatened by the United States. And the idea that they would denominate their trade and give sovereignty to a country that imposes its will on them means that they are looking for means of settlement outside the US dollar. Much has been made about new cryptocurrencies, which is to say, like the brick currency. I don't think that's a threat at all. My friend Doug Casey says the US dollar is an I owe you nothing. The euro is a who owes you nothing. And the brick is a nobody owes you nothing. The truth is that as little as these countries trust us, they trust each other even less.
Correct.
And I believe that gold, which isn't a promise to pay, but rather payment itself, will be a great beneficiary of the disintermediation of world trade away from the US dollar as a reserve currency. By the way, I think the US dollar will be the reserve currency 20 years from now. I just think its market share will be less than it is today. But let's stop blaming the rest of the world. Let's look at the United States in terms of why precious metals will do well. The debasement of the medium of exchange, which is to say the US dollar, and by proxy, the US Treasury market, is insane. First of all, let's look at the creditor. $32 trillion in recourse on balance sheet liabilities. 26 trillion net of the Fed's balance sheet. $100 trillion in net present value, not nominal values, net present value of off-balance sheet liabilities, Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, veterans benefits, federal pension trust funds. $100 trillion. So collectively at the federal level, we're upside down over $125 trillion. And we propose to service this debt with a budget that's in deficit $2 trillion a year. Mm-hmm. The arithmetic is farcical. It's totally farcical. But just for fun, let's look at the yield. Let's look at the best historic savings instrument in the world. The deepest and most liquid is the US 10-year Treasury. Let's look at the value proposition for the greatest competition gold has. The thing yields savers 3.5% in a currency that the Congressional Budget Office, not some cranky old libertarian, suggests is depreciating the value of the dollar by 7% a year. So the US government absolutely positively guarantees that if you lend them money for 10 years, they'll cost you 3.5% of your purchasing power, compounded every year for 10 years. And you know what, Adam? I believe it. That's what they'll do. Jim Grant calls this return-free risk.
Yeah.
So think about the fact that the principal competitor for gold and silver is return-free risk. And think in your own mind whether that's a mountain too high to climb. But it gets worse or better, depending on your point of view. Inflation and negative real interest rates obliterate the long bond market. And the long bond market is an enormous market, particularly relative to gold. The market share of precious metals relative to other savings and investment classes in the United States currently is less than 0.5%.
All right.
Down from a 40-year mean of 2%. And by the way, an estimated market share in 1981, its peak, in excess of 5%. I'm not suggesting that the world is going to sell all their long bonds and go into gold. I'm suggesting that the market share of precious metals will return to its 40-year mean, which is to say 2%. And if that occurs, demand for precious metals will quadruple. And that's what I think is going to happen. It's precisely what I think is going to happen. Prices are set on the margin. And I believe that that will be very, very good for precious metals prices. Will it occur in 2023? I don't know. Will it occur? I've never seen math lie. I guess there's a couple outcomes that investors need to consider. The first would be inflation destruction through a recession. We have learned over the last 40 years that the expected policy tool in an economic slowdown is artificially low interest rates and quantitative easing, which is to say counterfeiting, which, while in the near term of a recession would be bad for precious metals prices, in the long term, the policy prescription would be great for precious metals prices. Don't think that in the first instance, people should buy gold just because they think it's going to go up. I think they should buy it as a way to maintain their purchasing power. I think it's the responsibility of a mature adult to organize his or her life in a way that will give them the best outcome. And I think gold is an absolute component of that. I have no idea what's going to happen in terms of my mass psychology. I'm talking about your listeners taking action themselves to secure their well-being.
Yeah.
Buy it and in fact hope it goes wrong, it goes down.